Hello, how are you all? Nice to see you. Well, all set to listen to a new story? Yes, I would love to have suggestions from all of you about what kind of stories you would like to listen to or discuss. So it'll be a pleasure if I receive those kind of messages, and thank you for your appreciative messages. That's very generous and kind of you, and they really give me immense pleasure. Thank you. So let's get started. Now was my cat, my pet. His name is Peppy, and he's insisting on coming in the middle. Okay. Now the name of the story is The Cave, and it has been written by Jean McCord. It put these thoughts in my mind, that at the end of the day, it's very important to have relationships and friends and relatives, because man is not an island. A man is supposed to share, communicate, and help, or take help, and have people around. So that's what life is about. So it's very important. It's very important to have companionship and people you can communicate with. It's very healthy. And now this story is about a gentleman who is out on his own and is alone. And there's so many people in the world who are left alone and have no choice but how they survive and how brave they are. Though it is very hard, but they do it. So we'll come across the character of George. He's an elderly man, and that's what he did. He found a way, he accepted the fact, and he went on with it. So it begins like this. I know I'm to blame, the teller of the story says. Find out what happened and see whether you agree that Charlie was guilty. So this is Charlie who's telling the story. And he says, George has gone. He's either dead or he's crawled off into one of the deep caves and laid himself down in darkness and silence to die. How long do you think it'll take for an old man to die of a broken heart? What a significant question. I know I'm to blame, Charlie says. I had my part in what happened, except right at the end when the gang went and did what they did. I wasn't in on that, but I might as well have been. It was the same in the end anyways. When the work and the glory was gone, there was simply no reason for George to go on living. You feel the regret in his voice. I was the only one who knew about him at first. One Saturday morning in early spring, I left the house for a run. I galloped long and hard along the banks of the Goldaming River to get the kinks out of my knees. I had got a little further than I had ever been before when I had suddenly seen a new path angling up from the river road. I had swung into it and loped along uphill as far as I could until a stitch in my side made me stop. As I was looking up the hill about 6 meters, I saw something hidden behind some bush. I wish now I'd gone on and left it alone, but my curiosity always gets the better of me. I went soundlessly up the hill in my running shoes, noticing that there were no steps or tracks to give this away. Whatever it was, I got up to it and found it was the mouth of a cave, high on the hill, with a perfect view up and down the river. It had been boarded over with timber and some rough river-washed planks. A skinny door hung slightly open on leather hinges, creaking. I started to stick my nose in the crack. Then, just a voice remarked behind my back, "Looking for something." And I spun round so fast and so guiltily that I almost lost my balance. So this is a seaside and there are a lot of caves here, which are being explored by Charlie. There was an old man sitting casually under a tree and keeping so still that I hadn't even seen him. But he had been watching me probably since the moment that I'd started up the hill. He looked so weird. I recognized him right away for what he was, a tramp. Yet, he wasn't like any other tramp I had ever seen. His hair was long and tangled, falling almost to his shoulders like a biblical prophet's. And his face was a mass of porcupine bristles, not having been shaved in weeks. His nose was a narrow, anxious-looking beak, but his brown eyes were as soft as the spring water, and his mouth was clamped on the broken stub of a pipe, unlit. There was that look in his eye that told me he was harmless. "Sit down, boy, if you like," he motioned me over. I went and squatted, looking up and down at the view companionably. After a while he spoke again. "Got a name?" I almost said, "Yes, sir, Charles," but I stopped myself. "Charlie," I grunted. "Good name," he said. "Long lineage, way back. You heard of Charlemagne?" Yes, I looked at him curiously. I'd studied that in history classes, but where had he heard about him? Same name means Charlie the Greatest. Royal name, dozens of crowned heads answered to it. Oh yeah, I was interested in spite of myself. Now why hadn't the teacher mentioned that? It might have made that history lesson a little easier to take. "Got a pretty royal name myself," the old tramp was saying. "George. Same as 6 kings of England, 2 of Greece, a president of the United States, and a saint. He was quite a dragon hunter. Not that it's ever brought me much." So he was very knowledgeable, well read, you can guess that. He was looking ruefully at his pipe, which was quite empty. And then to make it look funny and to make me laugh, which I did, he wriggled his big toe, which was sticking right out of his shoe. I wished I had some tobacco to give him, but I didn't. Maybe another time. "You live it there?" I asked, jerked my thumb at the boards hiding the cape. "Well, just let's say it's my passport to paradise." What a way of calling a home. I thought, this old boy's got a few bats flying around in his belfry. But he had my curiosity roused again just the same. "I'll come back tomorrow and bring him some tobacco," I thought. "I can take some from my dad and he'll never miss it." As it happened, I didn't return the next day because my parents made me go with them to visit Aunt Margaret. A week later, Saturday again, I wrapped some tobacco in a handkerchief and headed back to see old George. Usually I would have gone to the clubhouse and spent the day with my gang. I belong to the Jesse James gang. When you live in a city like ours, where all the tough kids seem jammed together on the south side, you either join a gang or get your head knocked off. But we are not really fierce guys, not like some of the gangs you read about in other parts of the country. We don't have police records, we don't go in for mugging or robbery or any of that stuff. We just get together for protection. The toughest gang of all lives down on the river flats and call themselves the river rats. We all stay away from them as much as we can. So he's a regular kind of an innocent, bright little kid. The river rats, I just wouldn't have wanted to belong to them. I was walking on the new trail leading to George's place, going slowly, when I felt a sudden prickle of cold air on my neck, and the coolness led me right to a small opening that slanted down into the ground. I knew it was the air hole for some cave, a new one I'd never been in. You see, the cliffs are made of limestone, and waters trickling down through them for millions of years have cut out many caves. And my gang has been looking for a cave for such a long time, so we could keep a secret place. And we wanted to hold meetings there. So I thought this was it, our own cave. I would go and tell the gang. I ran all the way back and made about as good a time as was possible with only 2 legs. The gang were all gathered at the usual place. They were itchy with restlessness, and it made the perfect announcement. "You're late, Charlie," Pat Dalloway, our leader, said. He narrowed his eyes while I was giving the details of my discovery. "What are we waiting for?" Butts yelled. "Lead on, boy, let's go." Chunky and Ted and the others were yelling. They followed me, a pounding troop at my heels, though we had to stop several times. We clustered round at the spot, and Pat fell on his knees and stuck his head into the hole. "It's a good one, Charlie," he said with a grin. "And since you were the finder, to you goes the honor." I opened my mouth to protest, because going into a cave for the first time is always scary. You know, such things as saber-toothed tigers and floating ghosts don't exist. But when you are in total darkness, in an unknown place, with only a small flashlight, you become suddenly positive that they not only do exist, but they're breathing down your neck. That instant, oops. No, we can't have it any other way. Can we, boys?" Pat said as he saw my face. I could only swallow and shrug, but I thought to myself, "Okay, Dalloway, if you do this couple of more times like this, I'll be ready to take over the gang." I took one flashlight in my hand and dropped another inside my shirt. And then I stuck my head in the hole and lay down on my stomach. So, after wriggling until my feet were out of sight of the gang, the little hole took me by surprise and suddenly slanted down at a swift angle. There was nothing to grab, just the sandstone walls. I slid down the hole as if I was on one of those little tin slides at a children's playground, and I dropped down into what I seemed the center of the earth. I rolled out of the chute like a marble and fell about a meter to bounce on a soft, cool sand. And then I sat there rubbing my hands and stomach to ease the smarting and feeling myself. But thank goodness I was okay. However, a thought occurred to me. How was I going to get out? The hole was too steep and smooth to climb back. I crawled over to the flashlight, and all I could see was blackness all around me. There was no sound in the cave. It felt as if there had never been a single sound ever in there. I couldn't hear the gang, so they were not following me. It was spooky in that huge cave. It felt I was among the dead I'd read about and even looked around a bit, but not too much. I could only see yellow walls and white sand. I was wondering, was I the first one to ever come here? My light was wavering. I had to get out. I turned and started walking, hurrying for what seemed like a few kilometers. But there was nothing to judge by, so you didn't know how far. A few steps even seemed like a long way. Okay, my flashlight was getting dimmer and my fear was growing. And just when my light was about to go out for good, and I was going to throw myself down and yell in terror for help, I saw a penis around a bend. I shot around the corner and found myself in a room about as big as a living room at home. It was still a cave, but surely someone was living in it. There was scraps of furniture, made up furniture, boxes and planks. The front of the cave was boarded over with old planks, and the door swung lazily on leather hinges. So where do you think he had reached? I looked around, and then I realized what was different from any living room in a house. The walls were covered with statues, not the kind carved from wood. These statues were cut right out of the walls in what our art teacher calls bas relief. This looked like living beings who were growing out of the rock, and all of them were watching carefully. But I was glad to see the sunlight through the door. I could only sob with relief. But again my curiosity was still with me, so I looked around. I could recognize certain figures. One was Lincoln, one was George Washington. Another wall held a crucifixion scene, and next to that was a man on a horse wearing armor. Oh my God. As I walked towards the door, it struck me then. I'd seen that door before. I stepped through it, looked around feeling terribly foolish, and found myself staring into what? George's startled eyes. I guess he had never seen anyone walk out of his cave before. Hey, he said. Yeah, I know, I waved my hand backwards. I got lost. I grinned feebly. A wicked witch changed me into a rabbit, and a dog chased me down a hole, and here I am. It was the best I could do. I was so happy. I wanted to run over and shake both his hands. He looked at me for a minute, and then he laughed. You're all right, kid. I told you Charlie was a lucky name. Come and sit down. You look pretty fagged out. I stretched out beside him in the sun and squirmed with the pure pleasure of it on my body. What time is it? I asked, my face against the dirt. He squinted at the sun. Maybe 2 o'clock or so. I sighed. I'd been in the cave less than half an hour. It had seemed like days. That's pretty good stuff in there, I said cautiously. It looks like an art gallery. George looked down at his hands. They were square and blocky with dirt under the nails. It fills my time, he said. He stared at them for a long time. Finally, gazing down the river, he said, look, Charlie, I don't pay rent on that cave, but it's mine just the same. I found it first. I fixed it up. Been here over 5 years now, and I've got a lot more work to do. I'm just beginning to get good. And if people knew about me, they'd come and drive me out against the law, or if it isn't, they'd make one. He handed me a little bit of a boat that he had been working on. When I stepped out of his home, it was a tiny carved fawn, baby deer. Its legs folded under itself, its head bent as though it was hiding from dogs. Well, thanks a lot. I got up and stood there tongue-tied. I wanted to say I was sorry. I had intuited that it was to save my neck, that I had to come out that way. But he must have known. After all, he knew that cave better than I did. But I had to get back to my gang before they got up a search party for me. I plunged down George's Hill, and when I got to where I'd left the gang, I slowed down and sauntered up to them. They're all in a knot with serious looks on. Hey, Charlie, old boy, we thought you were a goner. They were all shouting at once and pounding me on the back. You've been in there before, old boy, wise guy, haven't you? Bat scowled at me, trying to be smart, sneaked out another way. What was I going to tell them to make them stay out of the cave? I had to think up a story. Look, it's not even a cave, it's just a kind of tunnel, not big enough for a cat. I didn't even mark it. You had gone too long. I was crabbling on my belly the whole way. I told them it never gets more than half a meter high, trying to discourage them. And then, what have you got in your hand, Charlie? Oh, I stared at my own hand as if I'd never seen it before. I hadn't thought to put the little carving in my pocket. And I did a stupid thing. Instead of bluffing my way out, I gave a leap and started running hard. With a head start, none of them could catch me. I raced along as fast as I could, and I outran them and got to my home. I sped up to my bedroom, and I could hear them in a couple of minutes yelling at me, "Charlie, hey, come on out." Then I stayed away from the gang for a while. I'd see the fellows in a school since we... Hello, Sabah. Thank you for joining in. It's a pleasure. Then I stayed away from the gang for a while. I'd see the fellows in school since we were in the same class, but I didn't go to the clubhouse nor join them. There was no real reason except that I thought I'd try being an individual for a change instead of just one of a group who all did and thought the same things. I took to visiting old George as often as I had time for it. He had started a new carving. He let me come into his place now and sit on the bunch of planks and old rags that was his bed. If I just sat and watched him and didn't ask a lot of nosy questions, right, he ignored me and went on with his work. I usually brought him tobacco and stole some food from the refrigerator behind my mum's back. At first I pumped him for information. "George, what have you been doing all your life?" "My life, boy, I lost it, laid it down for a little. And when I went back looking for it, it was too late. So it was gone. Just like that." He snapped his fingers. "Where were you the other day?" "Well, I do step out occasionally. Even an old hermit's got to go down into the morass of humanity. If you can find me another picture, why, I'd be very grateful." "Of course. You ever going to let people see all this someday?" I asked. "When you're ready, I mean." "Maybe I should have done drawings with burned sticks and red stone of ancient..." "Okay, that would have confused a few experts, I'll bet," he answered. "You know, Charlie boy," George seemed to be talking, but I was listening. "I've been thinking that's a big cave in behind there. You ever have a hankering to do a little carving?" I shook my head. "No, but his back was turned and he didn't see me." Old, he was muttering. 75 and that's the full allotment. Might not even get to finish this one. He chapped at his tool. "It's a way of life, Charlie, my boy. The only way creating things. Let others build the cars and roads and houses." He whirled on me with a fierce light in his eye. I shook my head again. 15, maybe 20,000 years, he's glared at me. "How do you like that for beating old Mr. Time?" I got up to go. It was getting late and I didn't have anything to say to him. "See you, George." Yeah, I didn't go back there for weeks. When finally school was over and I was free for the whole summer, I had been thinking I'd spent most of it with old George secretly. I'd begun to think about carving. The old boy had something there. I knew he'd teach me. I thought of that long, beautiful, empty cave. We built firewood there and warm up. People would come from all around. My parents would be so surprised they'd be speechless. "Do you mean our boy Charles did this?" They'd say to George, and old George would grin and say, "Yup, he did it. Charlie did it." I took a loaf of bread, some salami, pocketful of tobacco from my dad's stock and slipped off. Coming up to George's cave, I slowed to catch my breath. "Wow, what happened?" When I looked up there, something was terribly wrong. The boards hiding the mouth of the cave were all knocked out. I stopped to listen a minute. Then I heard voices. I knew those voices. I burst into George's living room and the shock it made me stick to my stomach. The whole cave was a mess, completely torn up. The furniture was broken. A fire had been built right in the middle of the cave out of the orange boxes, but worse than that, the statues had been destroyed. The delicate ones, the ones that had been carved out almost full, were knocked completely loose and lay on the cave floor as a pile of rubbish. The others had heads and arms missing and could never be fixed. Stupid kids. St. George had been scraped out of his saddle. Welcome to a new clubhouse, Charlie, old boy. Where's George? My tongue seemed too thick to talk. You mean that old tram he cleared out after we wrecked the place? I stepped forward, kicked aside. My fists were clenched. You dirty rats, you dirty, filthy, no good rats. Who gave you the right? Oh, come on, Charlie, big fat Chunky was saying that old tramp didn't own his. We've got as much right to it. We just chased him out and took over, that's all. You helped. We all went in that air hole and found it ended here. And that did it. Inside, I was all broken up into little pieces. I knew what the outcome would be before I started, but from where I stood, I leaped at Pat and crashed him to the floor. We fought, slugging each other, biting and rolling over on top of broken statues. Pat was a dirty fighter. He fought to win, no rules. He finished me off and for good measure gave me a couple extra kicks. No one else had interfered. They knew it was between Pat and me. Get out, he panted. You don't belong anymore. Butts and Chip dragged me out and threw me down the hill. My food, my bread, my salami scattered all over. So long, Charlie, they said. When I could move, I picked myself up and hobbled away. Tomorrow I would have 2 black eyes, but it is not over yet. In fact, it's just started. I've been lying up in my bedroom for 3 days now thinking. My mother brings me hot soup and cries a little when she looks at me. My father wanted to go to the police and prosecute, but I would not tell him anything. This is between me and my old gang. To do a thing like that, to destroy an old, lonely, destitute man's dream of immortality. He was talking about 500,000 years. To tear up what he called his passport to paradise? Well, they are going to pay for it all right. Tomorrow I'm getting out of bed. I'm going down to the river flats to join the gang that calls themselves the River Rats. I'm going to fight every guy in it till I'm the leader. Then I'm going to lead them to the cave. Pat Dalloway, you're going to get what's coming to you. Bill, Ted and Chunky Jim, you are in for a big surprise when we descend on you, when we get through with you. You're going to feel just like those statues. What a horrible thing to do. And all he has left is guilt and remorse. But he did not intend to do that. He did not expect his gang to do that. He was taken by shock and surprise. And what a brave old man was George. He found a way to survive and feel accomplished and fulfilled and still have a dream. And sometimes he didn't have money to buy tobacco or bread. So sometimes it's not good to be too intruding, too prying, right? But then you learn a lot also. And you should know where to draw the line. It's a combination of balance, isn't it? So how do you feel about Charlie feeling guilty? Do send me your replies, your responses, How do you think George would have died? Or was he strong enough to survive another blow? Let's hope and keep our fingers crossed. I would like to think that. It was lovely to join you. I hope you understood and enjoyed the story. I pick out some descriptive passages and stories so it might help you with creative writing, my dear teenagers. Lovely to see you. See you soon. Bye-bye.